Hello and welcome to the very first Beyond Limits 3D narrated tutorial. I hope you enjoy my work and that it helps you in your workflow. The technique I'm about to show you is designed for use in cycles. No worry, it's easy on render times and easy to use in the viewport. I'm sure you can convert it to Eevee, but in my own humble opinion, Eevee just can't compete with cycles, so why design for second best, right? Okay, ready for the best leather you've ever seen? Go ahead and open Blender. You'll see here I'm using Blender Launcher. I love this program. It's free and it's so easy to get the latest features while staying on top of the stable releases. Link is in the description to get this awesome program. I'm using Blender 3.4. There should be nothing in here that's not backwards and forwards compatible. Hit General under New File. Hit A, then X, and delete the default scene. Now, if you're familiar with Blender, you'll know if Node Wrangler is enabled. If you are new, head up to Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, search for Node, find Node Wrangler in the list, hit the checkbox, save, and close. Let's rock. For simplicity, we are going to use Suzanne. Shift-A, Mesh Monkey. Add a subdivision surface modifier. Now apply it. Tab into Edit mode, and let's make some stitches. A shout out to and very big thanks to Pixo3D for showing me this technique. Though I am making the stitches slightly differently than he did, his tutorial is great. Link to his channel is in the description. Select this edge loop by hitting Alt left click. Control B to bevel, roll the mouse wheel to get an extra edge, and use Shift for small movements. There. Now Control minus to reduce your selection, and Alt S to scale it down, making a nice valley. Control B again to keep the edges from collapsing later, and then Control minus again to deselect down to one loop. Shift D to duplicate. Right click to drop into place. P to open the separate menu, and then the selection option. Tab back into object mode. Click to deselect. Now double-click the Suzanne 001 in the outliner and rename it to Stitch Curve. While the Stitch Curve is selected, tab into Edit mode. Select a vertex on the bottom. Hit Shift-S and select Cursor to Selected. Tab back to Object mode. Go to Object, Set Origin, Origin to 3D Cursor. Now we can convert this mesh into a curve. Object again, Convert, Curve. You'll see it's now labeled a curve in the outliner. Now we can add our stitches. Shift-A, Mesh, Plane. In the Add Plane menu, change the size to 0.03. Now add an array modifier, change the fit type to Fit Curve, select Stitch Curve, change the offset to 1.2. Now we need to add the curve modifier in the mix to make it work. Curve object to our curve, and bam, that's looking great. Now tab into edit mode and let's get those squares looking like thread. Grab Z to see it. Scale Y to make it longer. Loop cut 3 across. Number pad decimal to center on selection. W to turn off the loop cut. O to turn on proportional editing. Number 2 to set for edges. Grab Z to make a nice curve using the mouse wheel to adjust the size. O to turn off proportional editing again. Add a solidify modifier set to 0.005 and a subdivision surface modifier to make it look rounded and smooth. Now adjust the ends to make it look right and the middle to flatten it out. Adjust the ends again if necessary. A to select all and grab Z to move it right into the material. Tab back to object mode. Shade smooth for both the stitches and Suzanne. Add a subdivision surface modifier to Suzanne to make her look better. Now, before we can make our textures, we need a camera, some lights, and a basic material for both meshes. Go to the Materials tab and hit New. Name it Leather. Now select the stitches, hit New, and name that Stitching. Go to the Render Property tab, select Cycles, and GPU Compute if you have the ability. Drop your viewport samples to 64, unless you're running a 3080, in which case you can make this tutorial and give me the credit. Anyway, for us mere mortals, 64 will do great. Select Denoise. Add a camera. Shift-A, Camera. Find a good angle to view Suzanne, and then hit Alt, Control, number pad 0 to set the camera to that view. Use Grab ZZ to move the camera in and out, as well as your standard movement commands to move it around if needed. Now, go to the Shading tab, World in the drop-down, add a noise texture and a color ramp. Move the black to the middle, make the white not so harsh, and plug it all in like this. Go to the Rendered View tab. Hit number pad 0 to view Suzanne through the camera and zoom way in. Back to the object and to the Layout tab. Now for the lights. A shout out to Jacob Maslowski for sharing this lighting technique, and his tutorial is well worth watching. Link to his channel in the description. Shift A, Light Area. Use the standard movements to get it to the front right of Suzanne. Put the light at about 70 and the spread at about 50. Hit the rendered view to see what's happening. Now you'll notice how blurry everything is, and that seems to be new in 3.4. Maybe not, but I believe so. Anyway, it's a speed up for viewport rendering, and can be fixed by going to Render Properties, Performance, Viewport, and changing the pixel size from automatic to 1x. Shift A, Light Area again. Solid view will be great for fast working. Place this light in the left front of Suzanne up high. Settings are about 200 power and 150 spread. Now the backlight. Another area light. Place it at the back, a little to the right and below, with 200 power and the spread at the default. Now let's get them looking like real lights. Hit Use Nodes, and in the color menu select Black Body and set it to 5000K. Repeat for the other two lights. That gives us actual Kelvin temp settings for the light for real coloring. Now let's get texturing. Make sure your object is selected. Head over to your shading tab and you'll have a principled BSDF and a material output. My material tab probably looks very different from yours. I like to have a timeline for keyframing materials, and I prefer a side-to-side layout. Set the base color of the BSDF to black to see what we are doing, and leave everything else at default. Now, let's get a nice ripple texture going on the surface. First, a bump node. Shift A, Vector, Bump. Now a noise texture. Shift A, Texture, Noise Texture. And a color ramp. Shift A, Converter, Color Ramp. With your noise texture selected and Node Wrangler enabled, hit Ctrl T. That gives you mapping capabilities. Connect the factor of the noise texture to the factor of the color ramp, the color of the color ramp to the height of the bump, and the normal of the bump to the normal of the BSDF. Whoa, let's get that fixed. Control-Shift-Click the color ramp to see what we are doing. Move the black of the color ramp over to make the black areas darker. Around 0.216 should be good. Change the detail setting of the noise texture to 9. Adjust the mapping scale to get the right size, X and Z at 8, and the strength on the bump node at 0.07. Control-Shift-Click the principled BSDF, and okay, that's looking really good. Now let's get the heavier cracking texture taken care of. Go ahead and grab a Voronoi texture. Shift A, Texture, Voronoi Texture. We need another color ramp. Shift A, Converter, Color Ramp. Set your Voronoi to Distance to Edge, Scale 12, Randomness to 1. Plug the distance node into the factor of the color ramp. Control-Shift-Click the color ramp. Now leave the black where it is and bring your white to here, around 0.043. That's looking great. Now for a bit of randomness before we hook that in. Grab another noise texture. Shift A, Texture, Noise Texture. And another color ramp. Shift A, Converter, Color Ramp. Plug the factor of the noise texture into the factor of the color ramp. Then Control-Shift-Click the color ramp. Invert the ramp, move the value to constant, and the black on the right down to about 0.413. Now adjust the noise texture to scale around 4.8, detail 15, roughness 0.5, and distortion 0. That looks good. The idea is to use this as a factor in a mix node, making a bit of variance to our awesome texture. Now grab yourself a mix color node. Shift A, Color, Mix Color. If you're using anything earlier than Blender 3.4, this node will probably be called Mix RGB. No difference for us, except it incorporates a new drop-down to make it more versatile. Drop it just to the right of the two color ramps, on the node line for the viewer. Plug the Voronoi setup into slot A, and the noise setup into slot B and factor. You'll see now that anywhere the noise was white, the Voronoi does not show up. Control-Shift-Click the BSDF to get it back to looking cool. Now that mix node is great, but doesn't actually do anything for us yet. To fix that, we want to use this newly created texture as part of our normal map. Grab another mix color. Shift A, Color, Mix Color, and place it over the connection between the color ramp and the bump nodes. It will drop on slot A, so grab it and move it to slot B, then grab the result from the Voronoi noise mix and attach to slot A. And voila, the normal is showing up looking really cool. But cool just ain't cool enough, right? It's gotta be cooler than just cool. Let's adjust our specular for some subtle realism. Grab another color ramp, Shift-A, Converter Color Ramp. Set your left color to a value of 0.4 and the right color to a value of 0.5. Move your right slider to around 0.991. Plug the result of the Voronoi noise mix into the factor of the color ramp and the color of the color ramp into the specular slot on the principled BSDF. Awesome! Now you have the perfect leather. But wait, leather's only perfect when it's new. You don't want your cowboy looking like a dude, right? So let's wear that leather down a bit to give it that real life touch. Leather is an extremely durable product, but it has a tendency to flake its shiny finish over time. We are going to place the underlying brown leather color into the cracks we just made. Go ahead and grab, you guessed it, noise and ramp. Shift-A texture noise texture and Shift-A converter color ramp. Control-Shift-click your color ramp. Leave the left color black, but move it to about 0.505. Set the right color to brown, 0.040, 0.957, 0.047, and move its slider to about 0.624. Set your noise to a scale of 15, detail 15, roughness 0.5, and distortion 20.2. Good. Now grab another mix color, Shift-A, color, mix color. Plug the color of the color ramp into slot A. Change the color of slot B to your exact shade of black. Control-C works great here. And finally plug the result of the Voronoi noise mix node into the factor of the current mix node. Perfect. Now that great texture is only in the cracks. This will ultimately end up in the base color slot on our BSDF. However, we have one more touch of realism to add before we do. It will make the mixing of the two sections more intuitive if we don't hook up the base color yet. Grab yourself a color ramp. Shift-A, Converter Color Ramp. Then a Musgrave texture, Shift-A, Texture, Musgrave texture. A noise texture, Shift-A, Texture, Noise texture. And two mix colors, Shift-A, Color, Mix Color. Once you have the first one, select it and hit Shift-D to duplicate it. Click to drop. Not only does leather have scuffs inside the cracks, but it also gets surface wear. So the Musgrave texture makes those scuffs, the color ramp controls it, and the noise texture makes it interesting. Musgrave height to color ramp. Control-Shift-click to see it. Left color to black at about 0.596. Right color brown at about 0.647. And the whole thing set to B-spline. Musgrave scale at 40. Now plug the color ramp into the B slot of the mix node. Slot A to black. Noise texture is going to be the factor, and you can set that kind of fine, around scale 50, detail 15, roughness 0.5, and distortion 5.6. Control-Shift-click to see the mix and see what we have. Brown spots with a green in it. Perfect. Now for the magic. Take the mix you just finished and put it to slot A of the second mix color you got. Take the result of the other colored mix color that is factored by the Voronoi noise mix and put to slot B. Warning, make sure to make this mix node say add or you won't like the output. There, now feed that result right into the base color of the BSDF. Control-Shift-click the BSDF and there, the color is looking amazing. But it can get better. Right now, that entire amount of work is affecting only the color, and just plain color has a tendency to look flat. No worries, as we're about to make procedural texture history. Or not. First, grab another color ramp. Shift-A, Converter Color Ramp. Connect the result of the Add Mix Color node to the color ramp, and the color ramp to the roughness. Grab the sunglasses, a little bright I think. Put your left value to 0.4 and your right value to 1. Perfect. Now, grab another Mix Color node. Shift-A, Color, Mix Color, and drop it into the line just left of the bump node. Connect the Add Mix Color node result to the B slot of the new mix you just placed. Insert a color ramp, Shift-A, Converter Color Ramp, on that line and move your white down to about 0.01. Now grab an invert node, Shift-A, Color, Invert, and drop that between the color ramp and the mix node. Now all those beautiful brown spots dig into the leather for a new dimension of realism. Congratulations on making it this far. Now for our final touch of realism to the actual leather, let's create some edgeware. This will involve a new shader. Grab yourself another principled BSDF. Shift-A, Shader, principled BSDF. While you're at it, you know the drill. Grab a noise texture, 3 color ramps, and a bump. Noise factor to color ramp. Control-Shift-click to see it. Scale 0.7, detail 15, roughness 0.797, distortion 4.1. Color ramp is set to B-spline. Black on left at 0.493 and brown on right at 0.495. Plug that into the base color of the new BSDF. Now, run your first color ramp into another one, and then out to the roughness. Control-Shift-click the BSDF, and then set the color ramp to the same values as last time, 0.4 and 1. First color ramp to third color ramp to bump height to normal on the BSDF, all left at default, and see the great two-tone leather we just created. Now all we have to do is mask it, and we are in business. The mask is created using the pointiness portion of the Geometry Shader node. We need the Geometry node, Shift-A Input Geometry, a color ramp, Shift-A Converter Color Ramp, and a Mix Shader node, Shift-A Shader Mix Shader. Connect the pointiness on the Geometry node to the factor of the color ramp. White on left, black on right at about 0.535, and the node set to constant. Control-Shift-click to see the mask. Edges are black and the rest is white. Now connect the Edgeware BSDF to the top Mix Shader slot, the primary BSDF to the bottom slot, the mask to the factor, Control-Shift-click on the Mix Shader, and there's the best damn leather you've ever seen, procedurally. One thing to keep in mind is that the values I have given you work great for Suzanne. However, they were a bit different when texturing this scene. When adding to your own mesh, be sure to construct with an eye to the end result, not the actual numbers I'm giving you. Now let's make some awesome thread. So click on your thread line and you'll see the nodes for the material we set up. If you don't, zoom out until you see your nodes and then move over to them. For convenience, click in a blank space on the viewport so the thread isn't highlighted, and then zoom way in to see the individual stitches. Drop the specular to 0 and the roughness to 1. Thread isn't smooth and shiny, so that will take care of that problem. Now everything else we do will connect to the base color. Grab a wave texture, Shift-A, Texture, Wave Texture, and a color ramp, Shift-A, Converter, Color Ramp. Color to factor, then Shift-Control-click to see it. Move the left color to about 0.294 and the right to about 0.583. Now change the right color from white to cream and the left to a dark creamy-ish color. Great. Hook it into the base color, Shift-Control-click on your BSDF, and voila, a single color stitch line. Now let's vary that up. Shift-D your color ramp. Hook the wave texture up to it. Leave the left color the same, but darken the right. Grab a mix color node, Shift-A, Color, Mix Color. Drop it onto the line to the base color and attach the new color ramp to the B socket. Nothing happens yet, but add in a geometry node, Shift-A, Input Geometry, and connect the random per island socket to the factor of the mix node. Awesome. Now, dirt has a tendency to get into the fibers of open stitching like this, but only sporadically. So we are going to make one more variance. Shift-D your mix node and drop it on the base color line. Be sure it's connected to node A and that B is a weird color like this. Whoa! Now grab a color ramp, Shift-A, Converter, Color Ramp, and move the black all the way over to about 0.77. Now grab the random per island and hook it to the factor of the color ramp and hook the whole thing into the factor of the mix color node and see what happens. What we did was to apply 77% or so of the mixing to slot A, so only 23% get the crazy color. Now that you see how it works, Shift-D to duplicate the bottom color ramp and hook the wave into it. Change the colors really dark and plug that into slot B. Congratulations! You have just completed my tutorial on how to make awesome procedural leather in Blender. Remember, this is a great start and you can basically do an unlimited set of variations off of these principles. Enjoy! Thanks for watching. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and comment, and I'll see you next time.